Welcome back to Life Sciences in the Spotlight and our final episode of 2024. Today's topic is around operationalizing omnichannel, looking specifically at the importance of internal alignment within pharma companies to deliver best practice in this space. I'm joined today by Sander Ruitenberg, Global Head of Omnichannel and Digital Operations at CSL Vifor. With over 20 years in pharma, he's led numerous digital campaigns and programs across various therapy areas and is a true expert in omnichannel marketing. He is on a mission to harness data and digital to create transformative and personalized experiences for patients, HCPs, and others in the healthcare sector. And I've had the absolute pleasure of seeing this mission in action, having worked together on a project earlier this year. Sander, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Excellent. So shall we get straight into it?
Let's do it.
Okay. So Sander, in our world of life sciences, what's your definition of omnichannel? And can you just give us a little bit of information about how you think this has evolved as a concept, as a practice in the past decade and what it's looking like currently?
I mean, that's one of the foundational questions, right? And I think there are a lot of definitions for omnichannel that people use, and there's not necessarily one truth. I think for us at CSL Vifor, it's been an important part of our shift towards full customer centricity. And that's definitely part of my definition when we think of omnichannel engagement, really putting the customer at the core, their needs, their preferences, be it from the channels that they like, the time of day when they like to have information to read through, the content formats and so forth. But that customer centricity is really an important piece. Then I think it's really carefully considering, as I said, what channels, what content, what formats, and looking at that as part of a broader experience. So when you think multi-channel, we think, let's say, personal or remote emails, channels like that. And we think of them one by one. It was more of an expansion of how we could engage. When we think omnichannel, it becomes really more of an integrated approach of what we would call digital and non-digital. And I think sometimes people think of it more as a digital approach, which I really do not support. I think it's very much an integrated approach, and in-person contact, as we know, is very much still a premium moment. It's a moment where both for the HCPs, as for us, if we look at HCP engagement, a lot of very quality engagement and interaction is taking place. So that's really how I look at omnichannel. It's an important transformation for organizations in ways of working. It affects a lot of parts of the company, also at CSL Vifor. Now, I think if we look at the evolution, I think customer insights, be it qualitative or more metrics that we track, are becoming more and more important. Also, when we look at personalization, which you mentioned, for us, very much the cross-functional approach. I think a lot of the initial efforts in omnichannel started more in the commercial space. We're taking very much a cross-functional approach to omnichannel, so really integrating or aligning, I should say, medical and commercial. And that's not always easy. We have to look at the language, the goal setting, and how we operate, because also compliance-wise and regulatory-wise, of course, we need to do that the right way. And then for me also, one thing I'm very passionate about is really the field-based omnichannel, as we call it. So we work a lot on things like integrated account management, the frontline operating model. And so field-based omnichannel is a key part of that, and looking at how we can really empower and enable a commercial field person, an MSL, a key account manager to execute omnichannel is a really important part of what we do as well. So that was a lot, because I think omnichannel is quite broad, but hopefully that gives you already a flavor of how we're looking at it.
Absolutely. That was a brilliant explanation, Sander, because sometimes we find that omnichannel can actually mean different things to different people, but there is a specific definition around that. I'm going to be a little, I suppose, provocative here, Sander, and you've already touched on it, but I suppose what some people might say that omnichannel is now just another buzzword, that it's just a term used by marketing teams, which doesn't mean a whole lot to those on the ground. For example, that field force you mentioned, those key folk that are actually going to be executing on it. What would you say to people who have that view?
Yeah, and I think it's understandable also because omnichannel's gone through an evolution, I would say. What we're seeing happen in the industry and then with our partners as well as with the pharma companies is in some ways a maturity that is coming into play when we look at our ability to execute through digital channels, our ability to work cross-functionally, also looking at newer technologies like artificial intelligence. So the omnichannel definitions from let's say 10 years ago are not the same as how we look at it today. Now, to the point of buzzword, I think sometimes we need to remind ourselves omnichannel is not the goal. The goal is for us to deliver high quality customer engagement that feels relevant, that feels impactful, and that feels to the customers like we're offering value through that. And omnichannel, I believe, is not a buzzword because it's a very effective methodology for us to apply. And one way I sometimes get away from this feeling of a buzzword is to also help people and remind them of the fact that, when you transition from one person to the next, and you do that in a way where you're sharing information, you're doing that appropriately. Let's say from the MSL, so the medical field team has visited a physician, and there's something that they would like their commercial colleague to follow up on. And rather than just giving them a short note to say, hey, call Dr. Johnson, they're actually, giving them a bit more information. The colleague can go into the CRM, look at what was discussed. And so it turns that follow-up conversation into a more high-quality conversation. That's already omnichannel. And that already shows you it's more than a buzzword. It's really a principle that we apply. And another example that I like to use is, let's say we have an evening event, be it a medical or a commercial event. If we know that a doctor has a certain experience that a colleague is looking for, well, what's more natural for us than to seat them next to each other so that they can have that conversation during that event? Again, that's applying the principles of omnichannel. And I think if we look at it more in that way, we start moving away from the feeling that it might be a buzzword. I think historically we have often overcomplicated omnichannel, which has maybe led to that impression for people because they found it hard to apply it into their day-to-day.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think at the start of that, you mentioned and alluded to the fact that omnichannel is a goal. It is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. And I think as well as reminding ourselves of the true meaning of that, it's important to remember that it's the pathway to that high quality, excellent customer experience down the other end. Totally agree with you.
You worded right? It's the pathway to that customer experience. But we also need to remind ourselves that we are the people that say if that experience was good or bad. It's up to the customer. They are the decision maker. And so where omnichannel helps us, for me, very much is in that planning phase, doing anything we can when we think of building an omnichannel journey, which I'm sure we'll get to, or building an omnichannel plan. We're putting together the ingredients that can hopefully result in that superior or at least optimal customer experience. But it's not up to us. And that's where omnichannel helps us, guides us to hopefully that outcome.
Absolutely. And Sander, now looking towards, I suppose, the so what of this, can you walk us through, in your opinion, the top 3 actions that pharma companies can take to align internally to make all of this happen, to execute their omnichannel strategies and deliver best practice?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the key questions, right? And in some ways, it's asking ourselves, what is the change journey that we need to be on? And I think where we've looked at that, and I think a lot of companies, there's a lot of good partners out there, and we've built up a pretty good technology infrastructure to be able to do this. I think also talking to some of my colleagues, where maybe we have neglected sometimes a little bit, is to broadly build up the training and the capabilities broadly in the organization. So people like myself, my team, we're catalysts for change. We're the change agents. We can drive that excitement, that innovation, but we're ultimately not the people that are executing this. So I think training and capabilities, really honestly assessing where you are as an organization from that perspective more broadly, not just in the specialized functions, is critical. And it's something we're working hard on. We're developing dedicated training programs for our field teams, for our office-based teams in the countries. Then I think data and analytics, it's spoken about a lot, but you already heard me talk about insights, making sure you really understand your data infrastructure. Where are you? Again, it goes back to starting with an assessment. I think we need to be careful to not rush in to the execution phase when we haven't gone through that. So I think really looking at that from a more ambitious perspective, looking at that personalization, that tailoring of the approach, it puts a new demand on our data, on our analytics, but also on our reporting. Some of the reports, some of the dashboards are very complex, and you can't expect a field person who has so many other things to do during their workday to really go into that. So I think those are 2 sort of starting points. Then always good to still keep evaluating your technology infrastructure. It keeps evolving. The world is changing very rapidly, as we all know. Setting the right pace, and making sure you're really upgrading as needed, and getting the most out of your existing infrastructure. For me personally, I look a lot at the ecosystem and making sure it all works together, because I'm looking more from a long-term sustainable approach. It's one thing to pilot, and we pilot a lot, which is great, to try out new approaches. But I also have operations, for instance, in my scope. So I need to think from a digital operations perspective. If we look at the digital channels, Is this sustainable? Can I scale this across different geographies, across different market segments? So those are sort of three ingredients that I apply. So just to summarize sort of capabilities in the organization, how can I build up that organizational readiness? Looking at the infrastructure from a data perspective, from a technology perspective, is everything in place to really be able to operationalize this, which then goes into that last piece, both from a people operations, a digital operations. Am I on a sustainable, scalable trajectory here?
And I think that durability as well is super key, because omnichannel isn't going anywhere, right? It will always be a tool. There might be new things coming up, but I think it will always remain. Wouldn't you agree?
I would fully agree. I feel like it's actually going to get more and more powerful. Now, we need to be careful that, and I said that earlier, this human interaction, it's hugely valuable. And we know that when it comes to more transactional things, so to say, service provision, basic information, people are quite happy with non-personal, with digital channels. But when it comes to really building relationships, being part of a community, part of a network, these in-person moments are hugely valuable. And the same goes for when it comes to explaining more complex topics and so forth. So I think we need to keep upgrading what we can do in omnichannel. Luckily, the technology is evolving with us, but not lose track of the importance of human interaction as well.
100%, because we're connecting with humans at the end of the day. HCPs, payers, patients, everyone in the ecosystem is the human, and it's relationships we're building long term for the better of patients on the other end. So totally agree with you, Sander. And last question, can you share an example or two of where you've seen successful operationalization of elements of omnichannel? So what were those key drivers of success, the learnings that our listeners can perhaps take away?
Yeah, it's a really important piece, and it's one that I'm personally working on quite a bit also with our regional teams and our country teams. And one thing, it relates a bit to what we were discussing about. One thing that is really important is to not skip over what I would call the omnichannel fundamentals. And that's not because people don't know some of these basics. It's much more because we need to level set and find a common interpretation of what we would consider the omnichannel fundamentals. And so things like consent management, things like understanding which channels you want to work with and why, and then translating that to omnichannel journeys, as I would call it. And with omnichannel journeys, we really look at finding some specific use cases that are important to our customers, important to us, and starting to map out these different touch points in a way that feels manageable to us as an organization at CSL Vifor, but also feels rewarding, intuitive, natural to the customer. So really lining that up. I have a face-to-face coming up. I prepare my customer through an email of the topics that I would like to talk about, and I ask them what they would like to cover. Yeah, I follow up afterwards with an email just to recap the discussion and maybe share some additional information. These are very simple principles, but the omnichannel journeys can really help us with that piece, but also with the cross-functional alignment. And what I also train on is the distinction between what happens in the office or from global teams versus what happens in the field. So really distinguishing omnichannel journeys, which are typically field-based. Sometimes congresses and events, you have them more office-based as well, versus omnichannel campaigns, which really need to have an interplay with these omnichannel journeys that are happening. So basically, going back to the basics, helping people take a step back. It can be overwhelming. It can be quite a lot of options that you have on how you execute omnichannel. So pulling them back to the fundamentals, to these journeys, to these campaigns, getting them to focus on specific use cases, that's what we're working on right now. And we have specific training programs and workshop toolkits that support that. So that's one ingredient that I would talk about quite a lot also internally. And then the other one is more towards the infrastructure and how we design things. I think we would all agree that websites are an important tool, asset for us. Historically, they were more destinations. They're increasingly evolving or are in some cases already content hubs where they start tying themselves into the omnichannel experience. And of course, a lot of us are working towards really upgrading them to be customer portals. Now, for us to do that effectively and also to really harmonize that across different brands in our portfolio, making sure the customers have a good experience, we need to think of master design systems. We need to think of aligning the architecture across our different websites. Typically, we have a lot of websites in pharma companies for good use. But harmonizing those, making sure the user experience, the interfaces stays more aligned is definitely good for us. It means when we apply data analytics, when we apply innovation, we can do so more easily. Localization becomes easier. but it's also great for the customer because it means when they come to one web portal versus another, the experience is still recognizable as CSL. We have different units in CSL. We have Vifor, Behring, and Secura. So also as an enterprise, we want to work towards that. It also means that they know where to find the information much more quickly and ultimately, hopefully, will make the websites much more effective. Now, I use the websites as an example. Obviously, you can envision that in other areas like email or other areas as well.
And I think as well, Sander, that point speaks to the fact that our HCPs, our patients, those that are consuming this information, are consumers. Because if we look at the parallels, of course, to the retail industry, for example, you see that it's the same experience, whether you're on different formats, different forums, and it's no different really for the pharma industry.
No, it's so true. And we actually look more and more to the consumer world. Obviously, the e-commerce model is not one we have. And so we translate it to our reality. And, I'm conscious of the fact that I've talked mostly about healthcare professionals. And that's a natural starting point for us on this journey because we have so much more direct engagement. But I don't want to lose track of the fact that, of course, this also translates to patient awareness, patient activation, how we support our patients. So that is definitely on our roadmap. We just felt the more natural starting point to really build up the framework is definitely with healthcare professionals just because of how we engage them so much more. And then back to your point, I think the real quality, and that's an advantage we have, is that we can look outside of the pharma world and really take what we think is working well, and we can translate that to our reality.
Sander, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up our last episode of this year with some brilliant theory and some real actionable food for thought and examples for our listeners. Thank you so much for sharing your insight on a topic of such clearly strategic and tactical importance for pharma leaders today.
Thank you so much. It's great to have a conversation about something that I'm so passionate about. It's a fantastic experience. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Sander. And thank you all for listening, and we'll see you in 2025.